Hello, everyone. I would like to apologize you all because we had some technical problems here. That's why we are starting with some delay. But I'd like to welcome you all, the participants of the workshop studying political actors and institutions in Brazil, methodological approach and research design. My name is Vanessa Elias de Oliveira. I'm the president of the Brazilian Political Science Association, ABCP. And it's with great pleasure that I open this workshop that is the result of a partnership between ABCP and the Brazilian Center for Studies and Research at the University of Orsborn. If Professor Thomas Kestler hadn't approached me proposing a partnership between his research center and ABCP, this workshop wouldn't be taking place today. For this, I'm very grateful to Thomas and the collaborative work he has provided. The aim of this workshop is to enable a long presentation and discussion of each doctoral research project, providing the opportunity to obtain specific feedbacks for your work, which is something that is not always possible in different kinds of seminars. We therefore hope that these 2 days of discussions will be very productive and fruitful, providing you all with important reflections on the work you are doing. I would like to end my speech by thanking the discussants who accepted our invitation to debate the papers, and to thank you also Professor Ingo.rohlfing from the University of Passau, who kindly accepted our invitation to be the keynote speaker. I will now give the floor to Professor Thomas Kestler, who will present himself and introduce our speaker. And I would like to end this talk by giving you good work and an excellent workshop to you all. Thank you. Thomas, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Vanessa. And yeah, it's my pleasure to welcome you too in the name of BRAS, the Brazilian Research and Studies Center, located at the University of Würzburg, which has co-organized this event together with ABCP. You may be forgiven for not having heard of us so far, but if you want to learn more about BRAS, you can find us on the web. I use this on our web page as background, so you can see that you can find us. I'm really excited that we have managed to organize this event and to bring together scholars from Europe, the United States, and Brazil within a quite short period of time. The plan for this event emerged during a meeting in Heidelberg last December. We thought about how we could support young scientists, and the workshop emerged from these considerations. And it's our aim to support, as Vanessa said, young doctoral students with their dissertation, and to promote exchange between political scientists working on Brazil. Our focus is on methodological issues because from our experience and from the thesis supervision, we know that there are many difficulties associated with methodological approaches, irrespective of specific domains and methodologies. Methodology therefore serves as a common ground for discussing projects from different areas. And the projects we will discuss today and tomorrow are quite different. They encompass legislative processes, parties, party research, policy studies, federalism, and issues of representation. However, before we start with our first panel and the discussion of these dissertation projects, we will have the opportunity to engage in a general discussion of methodological issues with one of the foremost scholars in the field, Professor Ingo.rohlfing, who will deliver an introductory lecture titled The State of Qualitative Methods and Current Developments. Following the lecture, we will have about 30 minutes for discussion. Well, it's my great pleasure to introduce Professor Rohlfing, who currently serves as a professor for methods and empirical social research at the University of Passau. From December 21 to September 22, he held an interim professorship at the University of Cologne. Before, he worked at the Bremen International Graduate School of Social Science and also as a researcher at Jakobs University Bremen. He has been specializing in the field of qualitative methodology for many years, and he has published extensively on topics like case studies, causal inference, and QCA. His recent publications include papers on epistemological cultures and theories of causation, as well as several papers on set theoretic approaches. So please join me in extending a warm welcome to Professor Rohlfing. So we share the screen now.
We are having some technical problems here with Professor Ingo.
Again, something doesn't work. You don't hear anything. There's nothing happening on the screen.
We are having some problems here. I would like to ask you just a little patience because we are trying to solve the problem here, okay? I think now we can hear you.
So I'm sorry for the. You hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you. Cannot see you, but we can hear you. I think Flavia can share your slide and we can start.
So
please, Ingo. The floor is yours.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, so you still hear me, right? Because I'm on two computers now. I'm not sure what exactly we're doing. Okay, but it works. Okay, so I'm sorry for the confusion. It doesn't fully work on my side. Okay, so thank you for the kind introduction. So I'm trying to give an overview over the topic that you see on the slides, which is demanding for several reasons. So Thomas Kestler mentioned this already. So as you know, the field of qualitative methods, it's huge. And we cover this also in the first part where I say, I'll spend some words on the question of what qualitative research is, because it can be or has been defined in different ways. And depending on what you define as qualitative research, you are talking about different philosophies of science, different epistemologies, different methods and research goals. So at my anchorage or my perspective is the one that I got from political science, because I'm a political scientist by training. So can we go to the next slide, please? Yeah. So the second section then, how we got here, that's specifically the political science perspective, because there has been a lot of let's say, dynamics over the past, it's now 30 years, which I more or less experienced when I started my PhD in the early 2000s. Yeah, so everything that I say then in the second section, and also in parts only in the third section, this is coming from my background. If you were having now a sociologist here, sitting here, or maybe a historical researcher, or an anthropologist, or whatever, then you would hear more or less, I would say, completely different talk about qualitative methods. Yeah, so this is important to keep in mind, that this is all coming from my experience, my training, my background, and then the third part then also from my research interests, where I speculate a little bit about what we may see over the next, let's say, about 5 years. So next slide, please. So what makes research qualitative? Of course, we could spend an entire seminar on this, not just one session, but an entire course. But in a broad sketch, I would say there can be two different answers. And the first one is the one that comes from philosophy of science, which is not, I should say, my strong suit. So, of course, when you do methodological research, you should also have some knowledge of philosophy of science, also for quantitative methods, not just qualitative. But I'm more the practical engineering, you can say, hands-on methods guy, not so much the philosopher of science. Yeah, but there, qualitative research is then tied to a specific idea, and it's about the German verstehen. So this is very old debate about erklären versus verstehen, which I think also terms that made it into the English language, and maybe not just English. So it's about meaning that individuals attach to their behavior, and it's not so much or not at all about causal inference. Yeah. So in particular in Germany, on the German speaking context, so also Austria, parts of Switzerland, there when you say you do qualitative social research, so it's Qualitative Sozialforschung, it's a standing term in German. This is then the perspective that you take, the first one. So to do or to say that you do qualitative social research, it has to be about interpretivist research, reconstruction of meaning, and so on. And that's not so much the perspective that I take or that I prefer, because I don't see why one should link a method or an approach, like qualitative research in general, to a specific philosophy of science. And you can also have, this is what we're having later on the next slide, and it's actually on the next slide. You can also have different research growths rather than, one slide back, please. We're not there yet. Thank you. We can also have different research goals other than verstehen or reconstructing meaning. And then the definition of qualitative research is, for me, based on what you work with when you do empirical research. And this is what I mean with material on the slide. So it's about the sources, you can say the evidence that you collect in whatever form that is appropriate. So it could be field research, you could go to archives, you could analyze audio or video files or tweets. It's not called tweets anymore, but let's say tweets, whatever. Yeah. So this is the material. And the defining feature then is that this material usually is diverse or heterogeneous. So you may not only work with, say, archival sources, then it's not that heterogeneous because all sources are of the same type. They're always primary sources. Yeah, but very often you have a combination of field notes, of ethnographic research, of interviews, and so on. And this is what makes a body of sources then diverse. And the observations that you make or what you get out of these sources, that's also diverse, and it's not standardized. So it's not a sharp line between standardized and non-standardized observations, which is a point that Collier, Brady, and Seawright that you see reference here emphasized. But in general, non-standardized observations are observations that you cannot squeeze into a spreadsheet and then you run something over it, some algorithm, and then you get a number out of it. Yeah, it's possible to do it, but in general, qualitative research, you highlight interview statements, you highlight parts from primary source, and this is not directly comparable as an observation that you make. So this is then the second way of defining qualitative research, which is the one that I prefer, also because it's philosophically, you can say, agnostic. It doesn't matter whether you do causal research or interpretivist research, radical hermeneutics or whatever. The common element, the defining element, is that you have diverse sources and something which cannot be put into a spreadsheet, which is just what you know from quantitative research. So next slide, please. So, and then in a very broad sketch again, I can come up with this 2x2 table to sort a little bit the type of qualitative research that I work on and that I will also talk about mostly for the remainder of today. And that's a combination that you see in the top left cell here. So the research interest is causal. Yeah, so we could also spend a lot of time about talking what does causal mean and how do we make causal inferences, but let's just say we have the interest that we want to make causal arguments. And that's then mostly nowadays, at least in political science, about mechanisms, and you use process tracing, and you go to the archives maybe, or you do interviews, what I just mentioned, to answer a research question. You can also do qualitative research, which is not causal, and that's then a very broad, again, diverse category that we have in the top right cell here. So this could mean that you do not just, it sounds too negative, that you do descriptive research. So you describe what happened, which also already involves making interpretation. So good description is also hard, but it doesn't mean that you are necessarily an interpretivist researcher. Yeah, could be, but don't have to be. And the not causal category also subsumes everything which is then about meaning and interpretation of behavior, ethnographic research, anthropological research, as far as I know it mostly. This all belongs to the top right cell. And then the defining element of the top row is what I said or discussed on the previous slide. You work with a diverse body of sources, but you interpret and process them differently depending on what your research interest is and what your philosophical background is. So now the interesting point is, and this matters, I think, a lot for understanding the political science debate, you have, of course, much quantitative research that is also causal. So you are then in the bottom left cell. And the qualitative and quantitative methods that you use for causal inference, they are, of course, very different because you have a different number of cases. So usually not so many in qualitative research and many more in quantitative research. You use different software, you use different data and so on, but still you have the same research interest, a causal research interest. You can also have non-causal quantitative research, which would be primarily, I think, descriptive. You may also have something like interpretivist quantitative research, but that's really now not my playing field or my home turf here. So most not causal quantitative research, I guess, would be descriptive. Yeah. So, but it means then that in the top left cell where you work qualitatively, but with the causal research interest, you are in between two chairs. I'm not sure actually whether it's a proper English saying, but you're between two camps. So you have the qualitative common element with non-causal research, also interpretivists, and you have the common interest, but different data then with quantitative researchers. And then if you want to talk about the state of qualitative methods and also possible future developments, then I would say it not just matters what discipline you are from, what I said before, but also whether you are in the top left cell or the top right cell. And in particular, when you are in the top right cell, whether you are interpretivist or more descriptive researcher. So what I have in mind, or what's in the background of the discussion now, but also in the foreground, because you will see it on the next slides, is mostly the top left cell and also what happened in political science, also in parts of sociology over the past 20 to 30 years. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so how we got here, that's about the current state. And this is then really where it matters that you always keep in mind. That's about the causally oriented qualitative literature from political science. And then again, they're mostly Anglo-American, say, minted political science, which is, of course, dominant or the most important part of political science in this field, and minor parts of sociology, but there you again have also more interpretivist researchers, also as far as I can tell in Anglo-American qualitative research. So next slide. Yeah, thank you. So if we look back over the past 50 years now, which we have later a slide on, then the book that you see on the next slide, so next one, please. Yeah, so this book is really the turning point. So one cannot really overestimate the importance of this book. Yes, maybe some of you know it. It was the methods book that you had to read when it was published in 1994. I also had to read it when I took methods classes. There were lots of roundtables, a lot of fora and journals on this book. And interestingly, the book itself or the content of the book is not what defines where we are with qualitative methods today. And that's because it's a very good methods book and research design book, but it's not so good from the perspective of qualitative methods. Yeah, so the argument is just to try to squeeze it into one line, which is probably not fair for an entire book, but let me just do it. So the argument is, look, there's one way to do causal research at least, also descriptive research, and that's the one that is about counterfactuals and potential outcomes. You may be familiar with the terms. So which meant that qualitative research should become more like quantitative research. Now, this is the one liner you can say that is underlying this book. So next slide, please. Then in the broad perspective, historical perspective, to understand where we are right now in this very small field of political science in qualitative methods, this claim was actually not new, I would say. So the claim that I made in the 1990s and parts of the argument that I made in the book, they were not new, but first they were made very clearly and also forcefully first, and second, and this may also have played a role, or most likely played a role, the lead author of the book is Gary King. Couldn't see it, but the lead author was Gary King, who is not a qualitative researcher, also not a qualitative methodologist. He's one of the big, great quantitative methodologists, but not qualitative. Yeah, but the other two authors had a more qualitative background, but the lead author was quantitative. So next slide, and then we'll say something why this book is a turning point afterwards. So what the book more or less picked up in, again, a very broad sketch, is what we have in qualitative methods in political science over 20 to 25 years. And there it was always about comparisons, or what has become then familiar as the comparative method. So the comparative method is not necessarily qualitative, but most case comparisons that you do would belong to the comparative method. And you may know Mill's methods, so the method of difference, or you may have heard of the most similar design. So this is what is behind the idea of the comparative method, which really dominated the literature on methods over 25 years. And if you read articles from this time, then you also see there was a clear hierarchy of methods, with experiments being at the top, then statistics, and then qualitative research on a distant, maybe third or fourth rank. So it was considered the weakest method of the three that were available. So experiments, statistics, and then there was qualitative research. And there wasn't much complaint about it until, I would say, the book came out, and this was then the turning point. Maybe it was also just bad, or depending on the perspective, good timing of the book publication, because there was a huge backlash and engagement with the book. So next slide, please. So this is then the second wave that is distinguished by Gertz and Mahoney in a very, I would say, instructive piece that tries to structure the development of qualitative methods as I explain it now. So in this period, which was then about 50 years, there were a lot of articles, also many books that always had designing social inquiry, which you have seen before, as a reference point. So it's always like, okay, in designing social inquiry, King, Keown, and Werber, the three authors, were saying this, and we agree to this extent, but we also disagree to another extent. It's always a reference point for what happened in the next 15 years. But this was useful because it led to a complete shift in the attention and focus of qualitative methods. So it's away from case comparisons, and it's toward what you may be familiar with now, and which may not be looking like a big thing anymore, so it shouldn't. It's about mechanisms, so causal mechanisms, causal explanation, process tracing as a method, Bayesianism, maybe set theory, and so on. So everything that you read now in, say, current qualitative methods, which is not about case comparisons, this is all developed out of the second wave of qualitative methods. So and up to then, it's a neat story, and then we have the third wave, at least. Next slide, please. Yeah, maybe there's already a fourth wave. I'm not sure. It's getting a little bit fuzzy now. But the defining element of the third wave is that designing social inquiry, that's now distant past. So no one is really referencing it anymore. So the qualitative methods field has matured. I would say also qualitative methods are more well regarded now, not just in political science, also maybe parts of medicine, medical research. Evidence-based medicine, where the focus on mechanisms in particular also increased, and the understanding that mechanisms are or can be also well analyzed with qualitative methods. So the field got more mature, but it also got much more diverse. And it's, I think, harder now for applied researchers to navigate the field of qualitative methods. First, because there are many more publications than before, at least in the first wave, but also in the second wave. And in parts, yeah, I would say also in larger parts, many arguments that you can read about are contradictory between publications. Yeah, so for example, Derek Beach and Rasmus Pedersen, which you may have heard of, they are big in and on process tracing, but they have a specific understanding of what a mechanism is and other matters. And then when you read something by another author, like Tasha Fairfield, for example, she makes in parts completely opposite arguments about what you should do. And then as an applied researcher who is just seeking guidance for an empirical research project, then you might be stuck or lost because you cannot really reconcile what you read about. So this is on how we can explain, how we can understand why there is so much talk now about Bayesianism. This can also be traced back to a particular argument made in the book. Also, why there's so much focus on process tracing. That's because, and other arguments that were criticized in the second wave of qualitative methods development, and which now explains why there is so much focus on process tracing. So that's the current state, I would say. Again, it's all in a very broad brush. So what we have now is, I should actually say this in the context of this slide, it's not that case comparisons are gone or that they have been forgotten. And so I'm talking about, with the three waves and also Gertz and Mahoney, it's about what the qualitative methods field experienced over the past about 50 years. Case comparisons are still done, they are still practiced. As far as I can tell, just by looking at what is published, there's still a lot of published in public policy research, case comparisons, also evaluation research, also in management, public administration. So there you have still a lot of just classic case comparisons as they have been done for 50 years now. And they haven't gone, but it's not the methods focus. Empirically, therefore, you have all kinds of methods applied, so case comparisons or process tracing and single case studies, or maybe also both combined. And as regardless of actually whether you are a methodologist like me or empirical researcher like most of you are, I guess, I would always recommend just to read or grab up to 5 articles that have been published recently or maybe over the past 10 years and just look at how qualitative methods are done in your field. Yeah. It's not, of course, that's also the nature of science a little bit in publishing. It's not that everything that you will read is good, and it's something you should learn from because it may not have been done in the proper way with regards to case selection or with regards to how sources have been collected or whatever. Yeah, but still, just to get a feeling about what are researchers doing and also to get ideas about how to present it, maybe also how to write an appendix on to increase transparency of your research, what we have next. It's always useful just to skip or skim through a couple of articles in your field and get some impressions on how research is done by some researchers. Okay, so we can get to the next slide, please. Okay, so this is what I've also been asked for to ask about possible developments. That's of course speculative, and it's, I think, really hard to tell. So looking back 10 years from today, which seems like already a long period to speculate about the future. I don't think that 10 years ago I would have thought that we are where we are today. So this all comes, of course, now with a great deal of uncertainty, my subjective assessment of what may happen. Yeah, and again, to emphasize this, it's only concerned with the field that I know, where I feel relatively comfortable to speculate of what will happen. And in parts, I think it also reflects of what I would like to see happen, which is not necessarily, of course, what will happen. Okay, so I have 4 points prepared for this. So the next slide, please. So the overall heading, as may seem contradictory, is that the future may require to slow down, but also to speed up. But this refers to 2 different levels. So the slowing down part, and then you will see it in application over the next slides. The slowing down part refers to the individual level. Yeah, so what individual researchers do and what they publish. Yeah, so that's something which is also my interest. So it's about publishing and publishing pressure and incentives, and what it means to have publishing pressure, which you may or may not have experienced already, what it means for science and the quality of science. Yeah, so there's the saying, publish or perish. So there is, as should be known or will otherwise be known soon, publication pressure. which may come at the expense of the quality of research that is published. So, and it would be useful to slow down a little bit. And in general, I would say always to expect less from the single study, in particular when it has been done by an individual researcher. So this is what I mean with the slowing down part. And you would see over the next 2 slides examples of where it may have gone too fast or where there may have been too much publication pressure. So the speeding up part then is about the collective level. So individually, you might go a little slower and spend more or put more care into research that you're doing, which may help on the collective level, because if we do research more carefully individually or in the single study, then if quality gets better collectively means that we can proceed faster. So the speeding up part is therefore on the, say, level of entire research fields, or you may say on the academic and scientific community level here. And this may also involve to work more together. So there's still sometimes the, you see it on social media, in case you're on social media, X, I don't know, I'm not on X anymore, but Blue Sky maybe, where researchers are proud and happy, which I understand, about publications they did on their own. So it's then saying, hey, here's my first single author publication, which is fine. But you will experience this also a research project, and it's basically every research project involves a lot of steps and a lot of decisions, and many things can go wrong even if you try to be really careful. This speaks, in my perspective, for doing research collaboratively. So in smaller teams, have co-author or maybe also bigger teams. And if we work together in teams, this may also help to speed up, because the research that you get out of team science or team research is not necessarily better, but I guess it's likely to be better in the sense of being more carefully done than when a single author does it. Okay, so this was the big introduction. Now the next slide, please, and I will make it more concrete. So this is what I also work on from a methods perspective, or it's sometimes called a meta science perspective. So research, I think, needs to get more transparent. And this comes then under the broad label of open science, which means more than transparency, but it also means transparency. And the reference that you see on this slide, but also on other slides, it's just illustrative to give you one reference. I think you will get the slides after the talk. One reference that you can check. So there's a huge field on open science in general, but also in the qualitative domain. So, and next slide, please. So what I sometimes compare research to, or how research is published, is the jury system, at least as I know just from the United States. So in Germany, we don't have a jury system. The analogy doesn't work perfectly, but I think it carries well enough. So when you see published research, that's the really final point or the end point of a research project. Then when you read an article or a book, then you hear what authors say about what they did and what they have shown and what they have found. And this is more like, you can say, the final argument that is presented in court. So the final statement. This is, I think, what comes close to the published article. And then if you, as a researcher, if you wonder, okay, but how did you get there? Okay, I can read it in the article, but I want to see the evidence. So this is what I find interesting, to dig a little bit deeper into published research and to see, can I get access to the data, generally speaking, in quantitative research, but also in qualitative research? Can I get my hands on the data that's used in this publication? And this is very often still not possible, or it's just too difficult to see what data was used or what sources were used in qualitative research. So, and this then a difference to the court system, where you, as a reader of research, it's similar to being the jury, and the jury in court, it gets to see the evidence, and there are expert testimonies and the jury cannot ask questions, but still they see the evidence and they get much more detail than they just get from the final statement. Yeah, so it's clear there are limits on how transparent research can be. You may work with vulnerable populations, or you may work with proprietary data that you're not allowed to share. That's all fine. Then this cannot be made public. But on a scale, transparency scale, we are still, collectively speaking, I would say, very far away from how transparent most research could be. Yeah, so as transparent as possible, this should be the dictum here. And I hope that in the next 5 to 10 years, we will see more development here, if only by writing more extensive appendices documenting what the evidence is that you have and also making this available. Now, in political science, there was a huge debate in the 2010s about it, and I would have guessed that we would be at a higher level of transparency now when I look 10 years back. This is what I meant before. So 10 years ago, I wouldn't have thought that we are where we are today. But funders, so the agencies who give money, are also looking more now at open science and open access, which is related but a different matter. So maybe there's more pressure coming from the funders to make research more transparent. So this would mean to slow down, because making research transparent is a lot of effort. It's, I would say, an effort you should make, but it's effort that you have to put into documentation and putting it online and so on. And this necessarily slows you down from the perspective, at least, of doing other research or publishing more. Yeah, so you have to spend more on one publication, which means you can spend less time on publishing other publications. So next slide, please. This is also about, say, slowing down. So most research that is published, you read it and it might read convincing, and you buy the arguments, and then you do your own research. Now, in the field of quantitative methods, and it originated in, I would say, psychology more than 10 years ago, it was recognized that some research is just bad. So it's not necessarily fraud. We have some cases of fraud, but probably not so much. But just some research hasn't been done well. There are mistakes in the handling of the data and so on. So this makes it necessary to validate research that has been published. So it means that you don't do more new research. Substantively, you're not doing anything new, but you take a close look what has been published, and you try to understand, how did this author get to this conclusion, and can I understand and also reproduce the steps that the author followed. It doesn't mean that everyone gets to the same conclusion when you look at the same data or the same sources. Yeah, that's most likely not the case. There's also research on this. Yeah, just like in a jury where you have 12 jury members, they see the same evidence in court, they hear the same arguments, but I don't know how often, still very often, I guess, they disagree. At least you may know some movies or crime series where there's a jury and they disagree. Yeah, so that's not the point, but it's just about checking whether everything has been done properly, has been documented properly, and so on. This is meant with validation. Next slide, please. And this is just an example that you can also look up. You can also Google about the name of the book, and then you will get more information about the case behind it. So this was published in 2000, I think, a very famous book about the incident of guns or gun ownership in the United States. And there were some things didn't really pan out for people who knew the topic. So long story short, there was an investigation in the end by the university of the author of the book, and they found not fraud, but the research was very badly documented. And some key arguments that were made, you cannot really understand what the sources are that back up the arguments in the book. And so the author could not document or not show what exactly he did, or what he also said in the book, what he did is not what you can reconstruct or reproduce. Yeah. So this is one of the bigger cases which made the news and which led to investigations. And this also was just coming, there was only public attention for this because some people took a closer look at the book. So they tried to validate what is cited, what was done, what are the arguments, and they said, okay, this doesn't really work out. Yeah. So this also means to slow down. So spend again more time on research that is published, but since the research then that is validated has maybe a stamp of approval or maybe also no stamp of approval, like for this book, collectively it means that we can speed up because we can be more confident about the validated research that the arguments are right. So could still be wrong for different reasons, but at least we know after validation that proper procedure has been followed. Right, next slide, please. Okay, this is what we had, and then next slide. There are just two more, and then we are done. So next slide. So this is what I mentioned before already. I think that more collaboration would be good. And there is some research or some work on collaboration and qualitative research. So it's not something which would be entirely new. But I think it has to spread more. So more people maybe should work together on a single topic instead of all these researchers working individually on different topics, which has to do with the first 2 points that it's easier to document research if you work collectively. And there are also more challenges, but also more opportunities to be transparent. And you can also do validation within your group, which also helps for the reasons that I mentioned. Now, in quantitative research, it's not so much done either because there is something like, you may say, a cult of single authored research. What I said before, the single author study that you do on your own, I understand, as I said, when you can be proud when you do the project on your own, but it's also a huge challenge and a lot of things can go wrong. So it's better, I think, that's what I came to think now over the years, it's better actually to work together and to get maybe less credit individually, but to produce, in my view, more credible research or research that is likely to be more credible in the sense of being more transparent and so on. So this is, of course, difficult for you, at least as PhD researchers, because you're supposed to work on your own. But just keep in mind that validation or maybe getting someone else on board who takes a look at what you've written can also be for you as PhD researchers or individual researchers something that is worthwhile. And the last point, of course, I had to say something about AI here. But it also may be a topic that we will see come up over the next years, even more also in qualitative research. It depends, I think, on the philosophy or the philosophical background that you have. So when you're on the, say, interpretivist side, and let's say very far on the interpretivist side, so some radical constructivism, something like this, then AI may not be useful or may not be well regarded for fundamental philosophical principles and reasons. For other researchers who work with maybe a huge amount of sources or maybe a large number of audio files, one AI tool or another may be of help. Yeah. At least, I mean, that's what you can do today already if privacy concerns can be safeguarded or regarded. You can use AI for transcription. So you don't have to do it by hand. AI, I think, got very good at transcribing interviews. Some also have used it already, I think, for coding. You need to give a prompt, but you say, okay, here are some documents. How would you code them, or what would be a code system that you, as, I don't know, what's ChatGPT-4, come up with? You would still need, of course, a human element, and you need to validate or refine what the AI gives you as a coding result. But there is potential, I would say, in using AI tools also in qualitative research for coding or transcription, or also other matters. Of course, there will be more going on, but these may be the particular concerning AI, the most exciting elements. So if AI works, again, it may help you to speed up. But of course, I guess you are familiar with also the downsides of AI, like hallucination. It may also mean that research gets, again, less credible because the AI is doing something which doesn't make sense and you may not spot it. Yeah. But in general, I think we will see more on that end over the next years. Okay, that's it from my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Rohlfing, for this comprehensive overview. I think we have learned a lot, and now we have kind of 20 minutes to discuss some topics you have raised, maybe some different things our visitors have in mind. We may use the chat on YouTube for writing questions, and yeah, we can discuss them here. Vanessa, do you have a question, or I have some notes here?
Yeah, may I start?
Yes, please.
Thank you, Ingo, for your very interesting and thoughtful presentation. I think you raised a lot of important questions related to research and qualitative research. I want you to talk a little bit more about the importance of open science. You talked a lot, you talked some topic about that, but I think it's important for us to discuss how journals and funders and also graduate programs efforts in that direction are important in terms of improving the importance of open science, and not only for publications but also during the PhDs, the publication of theses, and also for having funds for different projects. So I would like to hear you a little bit more about the importance of that.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, as an individual, you can always try to be more open about your research. As I said, the incentives are, if you just think about it in terms of incentives, the incentives are not like working in this direction, because I think that you're still not getting much credit for maybe publishing one article less in order to have what you publish published in a more transparent manner. But still, it's not just about what gives you the most publications, but what you think is right and how science or research should be done. And I think it should be done more transparently. So for graduate students or graduate institutions, I don't know how the program is organized on your side, but one would need to give, say, training or at least advice for PhD researchers or starting researchers on what one can do. Just show them the options, but also what the opportunities are in terms of repositories, how it should be done, and so on. Yeah, journals, even the journals or the funders, but the journals have more leverage to implement this. But the attitudes the editor attitudes towards open science, they are also diverse. Yeah, some find it important and implement it at their journal. Some maybe don't care, or some also maybe against it. And again, you can always also be transparent if the journal doesn't mandate it, but if it isn't, I guess you in general only are as transparent as you need to be in order to get published. It's on average. That's just my hunch. Maybe it's too negative or cynic, but that's my hunch. So funders, the European Union, for example, they pay attention to this. Maybe they're focused right now more on open access, so that your publication is readable by everyone, and not just open science. But I think funders are also moving towards this. The Dutch science organization is very active on that end. And I think and hope it, personally, I hope it there will be more pressure by funders or journals, or maybe both, because change, my experience is change mostly comes from the top.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I think this is something really important to discuss, because mainly for students, this is something that you have to talk more about, and to think how can we improve in every step that we take in our research. Thank you.
Yes, but I have a related question, because specifically from the point of qualitative research, and the very different kinds of data we use, it seems quite difficult to provide a comprehensive documentation of research, because qualitative research means you read historical records, you read primary sources, and I imagine this would be more work to document all these steps and sources, more work than actually doing the study and the analysis. So I'm asking myself, what is there maybe a middle ground for providing sufficient but not comprehensive documentation? Comprehensive documentation would actually be simply impossible in most qualitative work. And I think of some software that may help to organize and document the data used without entering every word you read or every page you came across over. But simply say the articles, the dates of the articles you read, and maybe, well, the books you read should be already in the bibliography, should be there. So I think there's still a lot of work to do, and some clarifications are needed, because simply calling for transparency may simply lead to an overload and to demands we cannot meet in some kinds of research, particularly in qualitative research. What do you think on that?
Yes, so these are valid points, and it mirrors in parts the debate that was, one can say, raging in the 2010s in the American Political Science Association in particular, where there was a push by some researcher, or maybe a larger group of researchers, towards more transparency, which I think mostly was followed or taken up in the quantitative domain, where in relative terms I would say it's easier to be transparent. And there was pushback or much more diverse opinions in the qualitative field for the reasons that you just mentioned. So transparency doesn't necessarily mean that you have to open up everything and document everything and make it publicly available. But at least that you go through the steps, or that you present the steps that you followed if only also for your own purposes. I think I haven't said it before. So over the course of a research project, so you may know this already because you're experienced researchers, research projects take a lot of time, and you take breaks in between, and one quickly forgets about what one has done and maybe not done, and for what reason. So for one's own purposes, it's useful to write something like a research notebook or diary. Yeah, so I try to do it, but I'm also not always following through. So that you're documenting for yourself, okay, on this day or in this week, I did this for this and this reason, and then you can remember this in 3 months, because I will not remember in 3 months what I did 3 months ago. And this can be maybe made available, or maybe a condensed version of this. And then it depends a lot on what you are working with. If you do field research and you're taking your own, let's say, ethnographic notes, then I would also say, so maybe no one can really make sense of your field notes, and you don't have to digitize them and put them online. So if someone wants to see them, I would say you should share them unless there's sensitive information in it, but most likely also no one wants to see them. But when you do interviews, of course, you should give an overview of how many interviews you did and when you did them, and also with whom, to the degree that it's possible to share this information. This could be shared, so standard list of interviews. And then when you work with interviews, for example, you should use software. Like, I don't know whether it's familiar already, something like MaxQDA or Atlas TI or NVivo or some other company. I don't have any stakes there, so whatever works for you should be used. And then you don't have to, or you cannot probably share the entire interview. Yes, I think some people do it, but it may be sensitive information included, so it's not possible. But when you extract information or code parts of an interview, this is what you may be able to share. Yeah, so I just did finished qualitative methods course on the master level last term, running over 1 year, where the researchers, the students, were using software, MaxQDA, and they were supposed to run their small research project. And they were also supposed to share what they did with MaxQDA. So you can get nice documentation or reports as a PDF out of MaxQDA. And this is something you could put online, that you can see, okay, this is a statement that was marked and it was coded as whatever evidence for whatever hypothesis you may have. And you can also explain why you think that this is evidence for this hypothesis. Yeah, so this, I think, could be done more often. Then there's still the point, it's a lot of work, and you said overload. Yeah. It's a lot of work for the researcher who's doing this. It may also be an overload for the reader. And that's also an argument that is sometimes made. Also in quantitative research, you have an appendix for a 50-page article that is 100 pages. Yeah, a lot of graphs, lots of tables, not just text, but still you have sometimes very large appendices. And then the argument also is, but no one is reading this, or it may even be strategic that whatever doesn't look good about your analysis, that's buried on page 47, but no one will look at page 47. Yeah, something like this. But I would say it's not about uptake necessarily. So you should be transparent about your research to the degree that's possible. You make this information available, and if no one is looking at it, I would say maybe more people should look at it, but it doesn't matter because there should be the opportunity.
Thank you. Yeah, obviously, well, this has to be clarified what can be done and what not. But just think that once you make a claim in a paper or a publication, it should be clear in any case how you arrive to this claim. So there should be a certain degree of transparency already in any kind of study. Well, okay, provide documentation of the data used is maybe a separate issue which needs to be resolved technically. I also use MaxQDA, and if it's possible to provide a summary of your work easily and by technical means, this maybe could be a solution. Well, we now have a question from the chat. I copied it here into our chat room. I can also read it. Oh yeah, here it is. So, question concerning the ethics and the anonymity of interview partners.
Yeah, I mean, that's of course a legitimate concern. So that's one of the arguments that was made again and again over several meetings at the ABCP annual meeting in the 2010s. This is what I mean with transparency to the degree that's possible. So if you, and of course the concerns, privacy concerns, also maybe depending on the research topic, concerns about safety of the interviewees, this should always come first. And there may be some people who want to see everything or say that everything should be made public, but of course there are very hard, I would say, non-negotiable limits on what can be made transparent. And if you think that this information is sensitive and shouldn't be shared, or of course if you granted anonymity to your interviewee and the interview was also only given based on this anonymity promise, then you need to keep it. And I would say no reasonable person then would require that you make your interviews available in a non-anonymized form. And sometimes anonymization is not possible because you may get from the context who's the interview was, and then that's just a hard limit and it cannot be shared. Yeah, so we need some level of trust, of course, also in science. So that's the overall topic. That's also something that came up. Why can't we trust each other? Why don't you trust that I do research well? Yeah. So that's what is just shown on the slide with the America book. I don't know exactly what went wrong with the research in this book, but something went wrong. So there are plenty of other examples where something went wrong for different reasons. So it's difficult just to put everything, to base everything on trust.
Yes, indeed, especially if you work on specific sensitive political issues, sometimes it may be difficult to provide the necessary background information. Still, most of us, I think, work with unproblematic kinds of data, and so this should not be relevant to all of us. We have one more question about collaboration. The question is, how can we improve collaboration in qualitative research, especially in Brazil, where there is a lack in regional and international collaboration? And indeed, the more qualitative it gets and the more specific the sources become, and the more specific also the background and the context becomes, the more difficult it gets to work collaboratively. Well, this is my personal experience too, because well, to find a common ground for collaboration may be difficult, especially across countries and regions. Maybe you can share some experiences on that, because you talked also about collaborative work, but this is easier if you can, separate your research into different parts, which is not possible in qualitative research.
Yes, I should have addressed this in more detail. It's true that depending on the, again, say, philosophical basis of one's own perspective, it may not be possible. So I tried to emphasize this before when I said transparency is important, because it doesn't imply that if if another researcher looks at exactly the same sources, interviews, primary sources, or whatever, that this person will come to the same conclusion. So this is not implied. And depending on the philosophical perspective, it's even maybe, as I said, it's not my strong suit, but it's not possible. So there is no intersubjectivity. Yeah, so then there's, again, I would say, a hard limit on what one can do collaboratively, at least with regards to the interpretation part. So interpretation here meant more broadly than in interpretive research, which is about meaning and so on. So it doesn't also mean that you have to split up the work. So it's not division of labor. It may also mean that different individuals, or maybe also groups of individuals, are working on the same topic, maybe first separately, and then after they have done the work separately, they are pooling the insights to see what the others made out of the sources that they accessed. So that's not news, as I think said before. So like coding, it's standard, if you can, to have documents coded by different people to get the intercoder reliability. If it makes sense to calculate something like this, how much the individual codings converge. And this, I think, could help in also addressing biases that you have maybe in interpreting evidence. So I can tell this from my own experience, that for different reasons, psychological reasons, cognitive reasons, it's likely that you have a certain bias when you read something or hear something and when you try to make sense of it, generally speaking. And a different person that hears the same or reads the same may have a different bias, or maybe just not have the same bias, and then working together may help in understanding for yourself, okay, there's a second way, or maybe also a third way to interpret what I've seen, and not just the one way that I had in mind. So this may be a way to work collaboratively, but of course, yeah, then there's the organizational matter, and how can one organize this? There I don't have a good idea. So I think there have been team-based or big team qualitative research projects, but not so many. So yeah. It's easier. It's always difficult to compare qualitative and quantitative methods, I would say, but it's easier there. And there's one initiative, it's called the Psychological Science Accelerator, where dozens or maybe hundreds of teams do on a global scale the same experiment. And then you can also see how context matters, or culture matters, or language, or whatever. But this is the speeding up part. So everyone works on the same. Instead of working on 500 or 100 different topics, 100 groups work on the same topic. But what you get out of this 100 experimental, of this one study involving 100 experiments, this is maybe still wrong, but at least more credible than a single experiment. So, and something along these lines, just broadly speaking, I think could also work or would be useful for qualitative research.
Yes, I think also there's a lot to be done and clarified, because even in quantitative research, I know of replication experiments which terribly went wrong and produced quite different results. Vanessa, you have a question too?
Yeah, here's a question from someone in the audience, from Rafael Sampaio, actually. He put this in Portuguese, but I will read it in English. for you, Professor Ingo. I would like to hear more about the use of generative artificial intelligence in qualitative research. Atlas TI and MaxQDA have already incorporated. Is this the best way forward?
So in general, probably not. So the transcription of interviews, if it's really only about what has been said. So for interviews, you can also say, when I do the interviews myself, and these were semi-standardized interviews, maybe you may also infer something or get something out of the body language or the response time or something like this. So this you don't get from transcription, or at least not a transcription that the generative AI is doing for you. But if it's really only about what a person said, and you have been doing 10 or 15 or maybe more interviews, then just the technical or maybe boring part of transcribing them before you start the coding, this could be, I think, fruitfully outsourced to AI assistant transcription. Yeah, so MaxQDA has this. I mean, one has to pay for this, but yeah, they have it. Coding, I mentioned this before, and it's on the slides. I think there's a hyperlink or a link to a website where generative AI is discussed for coding. It could be done. It also has been done for, I think, quantitative text analysis. So instead of oneself reading many documents, the generative AI or AI tool is reading the documents. This is coming up with something. This would, at the present state, or maybe for the time being, need qualitative validation or human validation. But depending on the purpose, if just want a first proposal, or first shot at a coding scheme, then it may be something that one can do. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you. I think we could discuss further, because there are lots of issues related to this old battle between qualitative, quantitative research. Well, maybe also talk about concept building, which is also big data. Big data means for political science, but still we have to take the time into consideration, and we are already somewhat late. Sorry for the technical problems we had, but I hope you enjoyed our this lecture. I thank you very much, Professor Rohlfing, for this very interesting talk and for answering the questions here. Thank you also to the visitors on YouTube for joining the lecture and for the discussion. And now we will have a short break and then proceed with our workshop to Google Meet. And this means that the public part terminates here. So thanks again, and I hope to see the participants of the workshop later in half an hour. Well, through Google Meet. Okay, thanks again, Professor Rohlfing, and
thank you
good
very
start
much
into the summer semester.
Yeah, thank you for you too.
Thank you, Professor Rohlfing. Thank you.
Bye.
Very good to have you here.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, my pleasure. Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye, everyone. See you in 30 minutes.
30 minutes, yes. See you then.